Hey, this is Waylon from Swiftwood Bows, and I want to talk today about tiller, the concept of tiller and the process of tillering a bow. Now, I think it's safe to say that there's no other part of bow making that is as important as having a good tiller and understanding what you're doing when you're tillering the bow. At the heart of it, it's a pretty simple concept, but when we're trying to make a bow, it can feel very elusive and difficult to achieve. Now, we talk about tiller both as a noun, like, this bow has a good tiller, this bow has a bad tiller, and we also talk about tiller as an action or a process. It describes the process of bending a bow, removing wood on the bow to make sure that it's bending properly. So we're going to talk about all of that. If you don't tiller a bow well, then nothing else matters. It doesn't matter if you started with the most flawless piece of yew or osage. It doesn't matter if you laid out the most effective design, and it doesn't matter how beautiful your finish work is. If the tiller's bad, the bow is bad. It's as simple as that. Now, I'd rather be shooting an ugly, simple bow made out of a marginal piece of bow wood that has a perfect tiller than to be shooting a beautiful, fancy recurve bow made out of some perfect yew stave that has a poor tiller. So, on a very basic level, a well-tillered bow means that each portion of the working limbs is doing its fair share of work. There's no stiff spots that can't bend, and there's no weak spots that are bending too much. If you don't remember anything else from this video, remember that. I'll say it again. On a basic level, all having a good tiller means, is equal distribution of the workload along the working limb. No stiff spots, no weak spots. So the first step to achieving this even distribution of the workload is to start with a really good design. Now, there's many good bow designs out there, way too many to talk about here. I'll get into that on another video. But they come from different cultures, they're suited for different purposes, different materials, and different climates. But they all share the same basic premise of even distribution of work over the working portion of the limbs. Let's take a moment to look at these beautiful bows that are made by a very skilled bowyer named Simon of Stonehill Primitive Bows. Each bow is perfectly tillered, but each bow also has a different design. The one thing that they have in common is that the stress is evenly distributed throughout the working portions of the limb on each bow to maximize the efficiency and durability of the bow. As you become more experienced and you play around with different designs, you'll need to learn the different shape that you'll be looking for each design. A well-tillered bow is going to be safer, more durable, and less likely to break. A well-tillered bow is going to be more efficient, and it's going to shoot the arrows more quickly than a poorly tillered bow is. So a common trap that new bowyers can run into is they get really fixated on having a certain draw weight for their bow. Say they want to have a 50-pound bow, and so while they're working on tillering their bow, all of a sudden they get to that draw weight. Their bow is now pulling 50 pounds at 28 inches like they wanted it to, but their tiller's not right yet, and they want to stop there because they want to have a 50-pound bow. But what they don't understand is that having a well-tillered 40-pound bow is probably going to shoot faster and definitely be more durable and last longer than a poorly tillered 50-pound bow. So, if you take a straight stick, a straight even stick, and bend it with equal pressure on each end, it's going to snap right here near the middle. So that's the basic principle of physics that we're contending with when we make a bow. So the design of a bow takes all that force that's being focused right here in the middle, and it spreads it out along the length of the wood. So that's why a bow is thicker in the center of the bow, and it's thinner out towards the tips. That's why the limb is widest here at the fades and gets narrower as you go out towards the tips. So all of that allows the wood to store a much greater amount of energy without breaking or without wearing out the wood, without crushing the cells in the belly. And that's our goal when we're making a bow. So never settle for a poor tiller. You have to keep going until you've got an even bend, even if it means that you end up with a kid's bow when you're done. You're going to learn a lot more that way, and you're going to have a better, safer bow, regardless of the draw weight. Getting fixated on a particular draw weight is something that you can do when you've got a little bit more experience. You have a lot more chance of hitting that draw weight that you want. But when you're starting off, it's going to happen. You're going to go under that draw weight, and you need to be okay with that, because learning how to tiller a bow well is more important than having a heavy draw weight bow. So now that we've got the basic concept down for what makes a good tiller, let's talk about what we can do to get there. So to start with, I just want to say that I don't have the one true method for tillering a bow well. It's one of the great things about this craft is that there's a lot of ways to get to the same place, and there's a lot of diversity out there, and I think that's a good thing. As long as the bow ends up with a good tiller, it doesn't matter too much how you got there. So I'm going to share what I've learned, but please know that there's other ways to approach this, and I encourage you to be open-minded when you get a chance to learn how someone else tillers. Assuming that you've started off with an appropriate design for the bow that you want, which is a whole other conversation to be had, the next most important step is to establish a good thickness taper. Now, we already have a good width taper. That was given to us by the design. We laid that on the bow, we cut it out carefully so we know how wide the bow is at the fades and where it starts to taper down towards the tips. That's all set up for us. But you can't be mathematical about the thickness of a self bow, because every piece of wood is different. So I don't want to bog you down with too many details at this point, but in general, the more significant the width taper is, the less extreme that the thickness taper is. So if you've got a bow like a pyramid flat bow, let me grab one here. This is a pyramid design flat bow. It's going to be very wide at the fades, and it's going to taper consistently all the way down to these narrow tips. Now that's a pretty extreme difference. And so for a bow like this, you're going to have very little change in the thickness taper. Most of the tapering is happening in the width, so less needs to happen in the thickness. But you have a bow like this long bow, there's not as much of a difference between the width at the fades and the width at the tip. There is some taper there, but there's also a lot of tapering happening from the thickness from the width at the fades down to the width at the tips. So you're going to have a steeper transition on a bow like this than you will on a bow like the flat bow. So long story short with that, as part of understanding the design that you chose, you need to have a general idea of what the thickness taper should be like for that given design. And don't worry, if you get it wrong on your stave, it's going to start telling you as soon as you start bending it. I was taught to tiller a bow by the master bowyer John Strunk, and by other bowyers who were influenced by his style. So the basic idea behind this approach to tillering is that thickness taper is king. It's the most important aspect of tillering a bow. And the best tool for measuring the taper is your fingers. So if the bow has a smooth, consistent taper from thick at the handle to thin at the tips, then the bow's going to bend evenly. It's as simple as that. So a stiff spot that doesn't bend enough is going to feel slightly thicker to your fingers. And a weak spot that bends too much is going to feel slightly thinner. Your fingers are amazingly sensitive, and you just have to learn to listen to them and trust what they're telling you, and that takes practice. Many bowyers will use their eyes to tiller a bow. They analyze the bend from a distance, and they look for stiff spots, and they look for weak spots, and then they make their corrections. And our eyes are really useful tools. I use this method as well, in conjunction with my fingers. But in my experience, our eyes are easier to trick than our fingers. So there's several common methods that people can use to judge a bow's tiller by eye. So on the simple end, you could just stand in front of a mirror, pretend this is my mirror, and just pull the bow and check the tiller. You could use the sun and a shadow on a wall. You could have a friend pull it for you. If you want to get high-tech about it, you could take pictures of yourself or take a video of yourself pulling the bow and then judge the tiller that way. A less simple tool, but really useful, is called a tillering tree. And let me show you that here in just a moment. So this is what a tillering tree looks like. You can see down below that there is a pulley at the ground that my rope goes up through. Here's my handle. So when I pull on the rope, it bends the bow. I've got a ruler that's hanging that is in just the right place, and it shows me the draw length. I have a scale hanging from the bow that shows me how much force I'm using when I draw, so that I can know exactly that this bow is about 45 pounds at 26 inches. And in addition to that, I can keep bending the bow back and forth. I can look at how it's bending, see if there's any stiff spots, see if there's any weak spots. So another tool that gets commonly used for tillering is called a tillering stick. And I'm not a big fan of tillering sticks because they put too much stress on the bow and they hold it in that position of stress while you're trying to analyze the tiller. On the tillering tree, like I just showed you, you're bending the bow and you're releasing it. You're bending it and you're releasing it. You're never holding it at that full draw. But on a tillering stick, you put the bow on the top of this board and you draw the bow down and you set the string in a notch and it holds it at that drawn position so you can step back and look at how it's bending. And it's not good for the bow to be held in that drawn position. It'll break down the belly and cause set. And not to mention that there's not really a very safe way of attaching the bow to the tillering stick. Your face is kind of right there, and in the early stages of making a bow, you're not always confident about whether it's going to be safe or not. With the tillering tree, you're nice and far away from the bow as you're bending it, which is just a nice added safety measure. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't miss part 2.